The novel coronavirus continues to impact our lives in every way. Here in Massachusetts, more than 9,000 people have died from COVID-19, and more than 125,000 have tested positive for the virus. Governor Baker has put statewide restrictions in place to combat the pandemic. On Beacon Hill, the virus has impacted the legislature's work. It's been 6 weeks since the House and Senate extended formal sessions beyond their traditional July 31st end, and some key pieces of legislation remain in conference committees waiting to be reported out to the full House and Senate. I spoke with Chicopee State Representative Joseph Wagner, the Assistant House Majority Leader, to talk about how COVID-19 has impacted the legislative process.
Well, it's impacted state government, Ray, at every level, and not only the executive branch of government, but across the legislative branch. It's impacted how we go about formulating public policy at the legislative level. We have obvious partnerships with 351 municipalities that are impacted by the changes relating to COVID-19. With respect to people who own businesses, residents across communities who are employed by those businesses, schools and school reopening. So across a broad spectrum, at which the center of at points is state government, there have been significant impacts. And notably, the legislature, which in even-numbered or election years would conclude formal sessions on July 31, while continuing informal sessions until the end of the session at year's end. On the last couple of days of session, we extended out formal sessions to go through to the beginning of the next session. And that's something that we've only contemplated 2 other times in 20 plus years that rule has been in existence. And so the circumstances had to be consequential enough and dire enough. I don't think that word is too strong for us to consider that, but that provides us with an opportunity to continue to react to some of the things that are in front of us as a result of COVID.
Representative Wagner, there are a number of legislative priorities, bills still being worked out in conference committees. What priorities do you see being enacted by the end of this current session? What legislative priorities, for example, would you like to see put into law before the end of the session?
Well, the first one, and a lot of people don't necessarily think of it as a legislative priority, but that would be the annual appropriations bill or the state budget. And I've been at this for a while now, and there have only been 2 other occasions in all the years that I've been at this that we've had extended delays of the enactment of a final spending plan for the fiscal year. And one of them was back in 1999, and the other was back in 2001. And there were reasons that budget deliberations were pushed well into the fall in each of those years. And there was a third actually about a decade ago where that was the case. But it's really unprecedented where in this fiscal year, which began July 1, we did a 1/12 budget, as we call them, or a budget for the month of July, which we enacted into law in June. And then we came back, and prior to the expiration of that budget, did a 3-month interim budget. So we've got a budget in place for August, September, and October. The spending plan for those 3 months is at about $16.5 billion. It was about $5.25 billion for that first month. And so we are going to be faced with the remaining 8 months of the fiscal year, and we are we continue to try to wrap our arms around whether or what level of spending will be supported by anticipated revenue. So on one hand, and notably and significantly, we are waiting for and less hopeful with each passing day that the federal government will step up and provide assistance as they did a decade ago when we went through difficult financial times across states and certainly here in Massachusetts. So the federal government, and particularly the U.S. Senate, has been reluctant to get to a level that I think would be necessary to provide states, including Massachusetts, with an appropriate level of assistance. And so that's on one hand. On the other hand, Ray, we're trying to, as we are in the reopening phases of things here in Massachusetts, determine what the rebound, sort of to pick a word to describe it, will be for state revenues. And without knowing the federal piece and without better understanding how state revenues will rebound, we're going to have a difficult time putting forth a spending plan for the remaining 8 months. And it is possible, and I speak only for myself and my view about this, but I think it's possible that we could enact another interim budget when this 3-month interim budget concludes. So that's on the finance front, and then briefly, and I'll talk to any one of these in any level of detail that you'd like. But we've got a police reform bill that is before a conference committee, an economic development bill that is before a conference committee, an energy bill that is working its way through the legislature that each branch took a stab at, dealing with climate issues. And we have a healthcare bill, the House and Senate having passed different versions of and offering different views on a healthcare reform. And that those healthcare issues are always front burner, and it's deep dive on top of deep dive on top of deep dive as we try to improve and make more efficient service delivery on one hand, and service delivery at costs that are reasonable and fair and efficient. So that's across sort of a broad spectrum of policy. We also have done a transportation initiative, a bond bill providing up to $18 billion of capital funding, and that's before a conference committee as well. So each of the matters I've just mentioned are before conference committees made up of 3 House and 3 Senate members, and we hope to achieve resolution on all of those things. It's my sense that the first one likely to that we might achieve resolution on would be the police reform measure, and I sense that one is more front burner than perhaps the others are, but they're all right there. You could argue that they're all on the front burner, but each of them is in the final stages, but where we haven't reached the point where we've enacted and sent to the governor those measures. And that's another reason for our extending out until year's end this session.
Representative Wagner, the governor recently asked legislators to approve his state police reform bill, as well as a $1 billion climate bill. Do you foresee this state police reform bill? Will that be enacted separately, or will that be part of the overall police reform legislation?
I would think that it would be captured in the overall police reform legislation. The governor, I understand the governor's thoughts. He filed each of those matters, his view of state police reform and his view of climate and energy as bills back with the legislature a number of months ago. And the executive branch, that's how the executive branch would operate. The executive branch proposes and the legislative branch disposes. But when things get to the legislative branch, we have 160 members representing 351 communities, and the Senate has 40 members. And those 40 members are not always in agreement on priorities around any of the issues that the governor has raised or that I have mentioned. And it can be an even greater challenge in the House at times with 160 members across those 351 communities. So I'm hopeful that we will get to the matters that the governor has prioritized as wanting to see reach his desk. And I'm also hopeful that we will get to each of the matters to which I made reference, but that he didn't the other day.
Talking about that police reform bill for a second now, what is the major difference, stumbling block between the House and Senate in coming to agreement in the conference committee on moving this bill forward to the full legislature for a vote? What are the differences there with the House and Senate bills?
Well, there were notable differences. Let me start with a similarity, if I may. And I know it doesn't go directly to your question, but I want to point out that there are a good many similarities. Both branches of the legislature and the governor support a process of certification for police officials, police officers, and those in law enforcement. And we have that across occupations and industries, not only in Massachusetts but across the nation. And most industries have some type of certification. So we're looking to modernize law enforcement with a certification process. One of the significant differences, and I can't give you insight because I'm not in the room as the conferees work to resolve the differences, but one of the significant differences was around qualified immunity for police officers, where the Senate took a different approach. And I know you've got Senator Comerford coming on in this program as well, I think. And so perhaps I'll stick to the House version of it, but qualified immunity in the House version only comes into play if an officer would be decertified. And there were several steps along the way to decertification. And the idea on the part of the House and the Senate and the governor is to make sure we have police departments and law enforcement agencies that are professional, that are modern, where training and resources for training are paramount to their successful operation and the carrying out of their duties. But where in those rare instances, and they're the instances that get all the attention, but to be clear, that they are the exception, even though they play out on the front pages every day. Most people in law enforcement who are charged with carrying out their responsibilities do it professionally, do it admirably, do it in ways that demonstrate a lot of sacrifice and self-sacrifice and compassion. And, at the end of that, as in any profession, whether it's my profession, your profession, Ray, it's certainly true of law enforcement, you have those that don't honor the appropriate protocols and things that go to the profession. So when you have the bad cop, we're trying to design a system that facilitates rooting out bad cops through a process of certification and decertification. And somebody doing their job is never going to be subjected to decertification. Someone who rightly should be under the proposal of the House will be. And qualified immunity, which currently governs and is an operating principle for people in law enforcement, that would be changed, and it's substantially different in the House version of the bill.
Well, Representative Wagner, we've only got about 30 seconds or so left in this segment. Just want to ask you finally, you mentioned a lot of key legislative priorities, the police reform bill, you mentioned the state budget, transportation, health care. How confident are you that all these key issues will in fact be enacted by the legislature before the end of this current session? Quickly.
I think we'll get to them. And if I didn't put an emphasis on economic development, we've got one of those moving that goes to housing and housing starts, which is critical to this state's economy. And I think we'll get to all of them.